There's another kind of day that could lift you as well. The day that most girls and some boys dream of, if that's not too sexist. And that, of course, is their wedding day. But how do you deal with the stress of unwanted guests, dare I say it, and where do you put people to sit in the wedding breakfast scenario? One bride resorted to sending her parents, this is true, her parents a letter saying they weren't welcome at the celebrations, at her own wedding, believe it or not, according to some reports this week. And now the uninvite has gone viral after it was posted on a social networking site. Oops. So it got us thinking about this, how stressful weddings can be, and who's not invited and who should be invited, who sits next to who, and how you deal with overpowering families and members who tell you who you need to invite and all the other stuff to make the situation worse or better. If you've got a story about the stress of organising your wedding, whether in the past or in the future, or someone else's if you dare, call me on 03459 811111 or email kentmidmorning@bbc.co.uk. Good news, folks. One person who might know all about this is wedding planner Pippa Binham, who joins me in the studio now. Good morning to you. Thanks for coming.
Good morning to you. Thank you.
I've always enjoyed being engaged. Never got as far as getting married. So you might be just the right person for me to speak to, if I can find a fiancé, that is. It's every bride's nightmare, surely, isn't it, to be told who you need to invite in a wedding? What are the big problems that you come across in that sense?
Well, yes, one of those problems is being told and parents getting involved, telling brides who to invite to weddings. And it can be so difficult to mediate those family tensions. And they all come to the fore at weddings because you have the emotions running high between bride and groom, and the family tensions can come out as well. And they all play their part, especially in terms of the table plan, where people should be sat, the wording on the invitations, so whether you should have the bride and the groom's parents hosting it or you mention them both. And also the wedding budget, of course, because that is a huge area of contention whenever it comes to finances and who might be paying for it.
Why is this such a battleground? Who gets to come and who doesn't? I always hear about big spats about this kind of thing.
Well, often it can be based on the budget. So people feel if they've got a financial investment in the wedding, they feel entitled, if you want, to invite the people and say to the bride who should be coming to the wedding. If they've paid for it, they should be allowed to invite who they want. Not necessarily fair on the bride, though.
Is there a good way to tell people they're not invited? Is there any way you can do that without causing endless trouble, which makes the Ukrainian problem fade into insignificance?
I don't think there is. I think the best way is probably to say nothing, because very few people will assume that they're coming to a wedding if they aren't given an invitation. Very few people would turn up to a wedding if they have no mention of it in advance. Most will just assume that they're not invited.
How should family disputes be handled, or any dispute really, at a wedding when the champagne's flowing and sometimes tempers get frayed? Have you seen that kind of thing?
Unfortunately, I have. And that's the problem, especially with weddings. You do have the wine flowing, alcohol flowing, and people under those circumstances will say things that they might not say if they were sober. And you do get, potential tensions breaking out. And the best thing is to have an impartial person, if there is possible to be one there. In my case,
such
a wedding planner. Exactly. Myself.
I see what you did there.
Exactly. Or someone potentially who you can nominate to stay sober if you suspect that there may be these tensions, to advocate and potentially break up such situations so that it doesn't spoil the day for the bride.
Do you have to be some kind of psychologist to advise who sits next to whom? Is there some craft to that, or is it guesswork and maybe just an art?
There's no craft to it. I mean, traditionally, there was always a very set way of having a seating plan, but you're finding today that brides and grooms are eschewing the old traditions because of these family tensions.
In what way? What do you mean?
Well, basically, on the top table, you would normally have a very strict seating plan, but many brides and grooms are choosing to cast that aside and have, say, all of the bridesmaids on the top table because they don't want those family tensions to break out. And so they're actually breaking with tradition in order to save problems.
I think you're talking from experience. Have you got any, can you share any howlers without getting yourself or indeed us sued? No names. No stories.
Well, certainly the wedding I did this Christmas, I can talk about it because the couple live abroad, but
they'll hear about it. It's
they won't hear about it, but it's fine.
You hope.
I hope. But in their case, they chose to have a sweetheart table, so just themselves on their own, away from the rest of the wedding party. One of the bride couldn't bear to even look at one of the wedding party, so we literally had to place her behind a centrepiece. It was not good. So,
what's all this sitting on your own thing? Surely it's meant to be a group celebration. That must have been very odd. Well, did you recommend that?
That's the other thing to bear in mind about weddings. They're not just about the couple. They are a family day. They are about community and embracing, bringing the couple into the family and, you know, exchanging families. You are effectively being brought into another person's family. So you have to bear that in mind.
You said things have changed. What other developments have you seen from the good old days of the white wedding and the big cake and all the normal stuff?
Well, I'm glad to say there are no rules now. That's one of the lovely thing about weddings, and it really gives you the flexibility to be creative with every single wedding you do. So many brides and grooms, rather than following the set, we have to have a set bouquet, bridesmaids have to wear a certain colour, the bride has to be in a certain colour. Thankfully today, all of those usual traditions are being broken, and it leads to a much more personalised wedding and a much better wedding, I think.
It's not very traditional to uninvite your parents.
No, that's not traditional at all. This is a very extreme case, and as I understand from it, this particular bride was abused for many years as a child, and so you can really understand the trauma that must have gone on there for her to make such an outlandish statement, but maybe cathartic for her in the process.
Yeah, we don't know exactly what she meant by the abuse, but a very interesting situation.
Indeed.
Have you ever seen bride and groom fall apart at the wedding and go their separate ways immediately after the ceremony?
I have unfortunately been witness to bride and grooms very nearly not going down the aisle at all. Week before, it almost being called off. So it can be such a difficult time, especially when you're balancing these family tensions between yourselves, to navigate all of this, and it can lead to confrontation between the bride and groom as well. So my advice, obviously, is to use a wedding planner if you can, because that way...
I wonder why.
That way you can obviously offload some of this emotional tension.
I have to say, your life is a bit like EastEnders. Have you thought about being a script writer for that? This would be another reality show.
Some of the stories I could tell, believe me, it does sound like EastEnders. Yes. Yeah.
What advice do you have for brides and grooms planning their weddings this summer? How do they deal with the stress? How do they get away from the bear traps that you keep having to deal with?
Well, particularly family tensions.
I'm not speaking for myself. I'm just asking generally, by the way.
Well, for family tensions, there are a number of rules which you can follow, which would help avoid them. One is having a united front. So both the bride and the groom agreeing what they want prior to any conversations in front of parents, and then making a united front in front of them. The blood to blood rule, which means that the groom, say if his mother has a problem, he would speak to her. Remembering it's not just your day. So as I said, weddings are about community, not just the bride and groom. And you have to take on a bit of the wishes of others. And it's about give and take at the wedding. And finally, making an appointment with your fiancé to see a neutral party. That doesn't necessarily have to be a wedding planner. It could be, but someone who you might be able to talk through these tensions with and potentially find ways to overcome them prior to the day.
You used to be a radio presenter. Which is more stressful, doing the microphone or doing the wedding?
Oh, definitely the weddings. Definitely the weddings. Far more emotional and far more interesting and lots of tension there, yeah.
Do you ever cry at the weddings yourself?
I absolutely do, because...
Are they real tears?
Yes, they are. You get involved in the bride's lives. They become your friends, and you take on a lot of the emotion of the weddings that they do. So certainly they are very emotional events in themselves, and I've cried at many weddings that I've been to, yeah.
I'm very impressed with your insights, and if I get that far, you'll be my very first call. How do people get in touch with you?
Thank you very much. Well, they can either visit my website, which is www.novaweddingplanning.co.uk, or they can ring me 01892 517 073.
That's great. So you've heard it first here on BBC Radio Kent with Lembit Opik standing in for Ian Collins. If you've got an amazingly good or an amazingly terrible wedding story, then tell us about it on 03459 811111.